This story is quite long, so I'm going to start from when I was a baby up until now. I don't have official dates, but I will put the year of when the stories begin. Also, if you're easily triggered, do not read the year 2004 as it contains a very serious topic. Please read 2004 at your own risk if you decide to read it. My mum and dad met when they were 14. They never really hit it off until they were about 23-25, 1994. While they were dating, my grandmother was always saying things such as, "My daughter deserves the best and has no business with someone who is dirt poor." My dad wasn't poor but wasn't very wealthy. He always had a job and has multiple degrees under his belt. When I was being conceived, he was working as a security guard and pulling in a decent amount of money to keep himself and my mother happy. My mother would work day shifts at a local grocery store, packing shelves, working the checkouts, etc. Jumping forward a few weeks later, my parents decided to tell my grandmother that they are having a baby, me. They had already told Dad's family and it was good vibes all around. But, once they told my mother's mum, she wasn't very happy. When Mum told her, she walked away, went outside for a cigarette and didn't talk to Mum or Dad for about 15 minutes. According to Dad, Mum started bawling her eyes out and locked herself in the bathroom. My grandmother comes back inside and walks up to my father and says, "Here is what's gonna happen. She is going to get an abortion and you're going to disappear." My father was absolutely destroyed that she did not approve of the pregnancy. So, Dad left the house and went home without my mother. I do not know what happened when Dad left the house. I haven't heard what happened after that. 1995, I'm born. While my mother was in hospital, my grandmother came up to see me. According to both my parents, she kept calling me the baby. Dad kept his cool in the hospital as he didn't want to cause a scene as there were other patients in the room that my mother was in. But, my mother absolutely freaked out. She asked my grandmother to leave and was saying something along the lines of, "How dare you? You tried to force me to get an abortion and now you wanna say he is your baby? No, fuck you," etc. From what I gather, she ends up leaving. A few days later it all blows over and my mother and grandmother are okay. 2004, my father is suffering from depression, anxiety and had lost his job. He searched for about 2 months to find a job but no one was returning his calls. He starts freaking out as bills need to be paid and food needs to be put on the table. My father gets a call from my grandmother asking how he is going with getting a job. He tells her that he has been for interviews but no one has called him back yet. My grandmother starts to belittle him on the phone. "You're a worthless piece of shit. My daughter is gonna be homeless because of you and your son will be taken off of you." Dad hangs up the phone. A few weeks go by and still no one wants to hire him. My father starts falling into a deep depression. He starts spending the next few days in bed just crying. I remember coming into the room trying to play with him and he would just lay there staring into nothingness. A few days go by, I think I'm upstairs playing my PlayStation or playing with something as kids do. I hear my mother screaming. I run downstairs and my mother screams, "OP, help." I finally get to her and I see her trying to lift my father up around his ankles. I look up at my father and he had tried to kill myself by hanging. We cut him down and sent him to the hospital and they hold him for 72 hours. A few days go by and Dad tells Mum that my grandmother had sent a letter to Dad telling him that this family would be a lot better if he just disappeared, etc. etc. My mother cut all contact with my grandmother after that and Dad starts going to therapy. Just to clarify, my dad is still alive and well. In 2020, after he started going to therapy, he became a lot more open with his feelings and started to improve mentally. 2015, it's Christmas and we have some family and friends over. We're all having a good time. Some family members are having a good laugh while others are very drunk. Either way, it was good vibes all around. Around 5:30 p.m., my mother's phone rings. It's my grandmother. My mother disappears into her room with the phone and doesn't come out for 2 hours. Me and Dad check on her every half hour to see if she's okay. When the phone call ends about 2 hours later, she comes out and pulls me aside and tells me what was talked about. Apparently, my grandmother has lied to my mother her entire life on who her real father is. Mum is bawling her eyes out and Dad grabs her and they both disappear into the bedroom for a little while. About 30 minutes later, they come out, sit everyone down at the party and tell them what has happened. Everyone is disgusted in my grandmother and most of them don't talk to her ever again after that little stunt. 1st November 2019, it's my father's birthday. My mother bought my father tickets to see his favorite band play called Green Spoon. Both are very excited as they haven't seen them play in years. They get ready and go to the concert. While at the concert, my mother complains for a headache. She takes a few painkillers and soldiers on. They watch 5 of the supporting acts and the headache is getting immensely worse. Grinspoon come on stage and start rocking out. They finish their first song and Mum says to Dad, we need to go home. My head is killing me. Dad throw her in the car and they both drive home. The second they get home, Mum is sprinting to the front door, runs into the bathroom and vomits. Dad follows behind her and holds her hair and gets her a glass of water. Mum did have a few drinks at the concert but she wasn't drunk or even tipsy. After she has a good vomit, she goes and lays down on the couch with Dad. 10 minutes goes by and Mum's eyes start rolling into the back of her head. We all start to freak out. Next minute later, she is having a seizure. Dad calls 000 and we rush her to the hospital. After a few tests, Dad rings me and says you need to come up to the hospital now. I get to the hospital and Dad is waiting outside. He holds me and says, OP, you need to say goodbye to your mother. She has had a stroke and the doctors say that you need to say goodbye now just in case she doesn't make it. I say my goodbyes to my mother and she heads to surgery. 6 hours later we get a phone call. The surgery was a success and she is alive. Me and my father are over the moon. The doctors explained to us that she has lost a lot of her motor functions but will regain most of it with therapy. A few days later, I'm out at work and my dad is going to the hospital to visit Mum. My dad goes to walk into her room and guess who is there? My grandmother. Somehow she caught wind of this. I don't know what was said between her and Dad while Mum was recovering but I know he said to keep it under wraps as we will tell everyone in the next few days. The next day, Dad goes up to hospital and my grandmother is there again. Only this time, she has brought people that we do not even know. Dad immediately leaves and calls me to ask who they are. I tell him I have no idea. I call my mother's sister, my aunt, and ask what the hell is going on. Apparently they are just my grandmother's friends and in my personal opinion, had no right to be there as they didn't know my mother at all. Now, I'm not a violent person at all, but while I was on the phone to my auntie, I said to her, do you really think my grandmother deserves to be in the same room as my mother? She has cut her out for years and now only gives a shit when she almost dies. What about we? She needed her support. My auntie said nothing. I reply with, you know, if I was the one that walked in and saw her, she would be very lucky to leave with a full head of hair. I hang up the phone. After that phone call, my auntie must have spoke to my grandmother and she never returned to the hospital. 2 days go by, I get a phone call from the one and only Witch of the West. I answer not knowing who it is. Hello OP speaking. She replies, hey OP, it's your grandmother. Remember me? I reply with yeah. Sadly I do. What the fuck do you want? She starts going off a nut at me, calling me every name under the sun and saying that now my mother is immobile, that she is going to try and becomes her carer and that she is going to make up a bunch of lies up on how my dad is a drug addict. My dad has never touched an illegal substance in his life. While she's losing her shit, I press the record button on my phone and just let it capture everything. She hangs up and I immediately get a lawyer. I see the lawyer a few days later and we talk it over. Because I'm my mother's son, I legally consigned to become her carer. So, I do and I give my lawyer the audio recording of the phone call me and my grandmother had. I hand her the USB with the recording on it and she plugs it into her laptop. She listens to it and is in total shock. We set up a court date to take my grandmother to court 2 months ago. We finally go to court. My grandmother is facing 2 counts of harassment over a cellular device and 1 count of defamation of character. She is also not allowed to go near my mother or anyone else in my household until 2023. Overall, I'm satisfied with the verdict. Also, my mother is doing much better since the stroke and is slowly regaining all her motor functions. I couldn't be more proud of her.
User Metralo, your grandmother is certifiably insane. Grinspoon is a great band. I'm glad your mother is okay, and you're a legitimate saint for not doing anything to her. Also, just so you know, it's defamation of character. It means that someone is attempting to hurt someone's reputation through verbal or written means, and is very serious. In your case, it was through verbal means, which is called slander, and is usually a tort, which means it is a civil offense and not a criminal offense. The nice part is that slander is easy to prove with a recording, and since it is a civil matter, consent to recording laws, by state law or province law, etc., don't apply in most cases.
User GratefulBuster64. What a waste of space your grandmother is. If she dies and I was you, I'd only show up to the funeral to dance on her grave and then spit on it.
User Demon Kato. Now, the grandmother would welcome the public spectacle, make it a tasteful and empty affair, with no words shared of the deceased. silently buried, and any last thought of her left in that freshly covered plot. Let her be remembered as she deserves to be, not at all.
User Shayberry. I know of someone this actually happened to. During the time for eulogy and memories of the deceased, the attendees instead talked of their lives and catching up with each other. A few even mentioned how much better life was when they cut the person out of their lives years earlier.
User Me Evil Bob. My cousin went to my grandmother's husband's funeral. This guy was technically my grandfather, but I will never refer to him as that. He often came home drunk on payday saying that he blew his entire check on booze and gambling, and would then take out his frustration by beating the shit out of my grandmother as well as my mother and aunt, who were children at the time. They often went weeks in the cold New England winters without heat or electricity because he would blow all the money and my grandmother would just barely be able to afford food and other essentials from the 2 full-time jobs she was working while also raising 3 children by herself and putting up with the piece of shit she married. My cousin went to support his dad, my uncle, who just wanted to see the guy dead for himself. He said nobody said a word the entire time until the priest started saying the typical nice things about the guy, at which time most people just got up and left. Everybody then knew what a piece of shit the guy was, and they were only there to see for themselves that he was actually dead.